Welcome to Storytales. Please like this video and subscribe to Storytales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The late December wind whipped across Mark Andrews' face as he stood in the doorway of his suburban home, watching snowflakes drift lazily onto the fresh-cut evergreen wedged in the back of his SUV. At 42, he'd spent enough winters in Connecticut to be used to the cold, but tonight the chill seemed to bite deeper than usual. The scent of pine needles filled the crisp air, mingling with wood smoke from nearby chimneys. His breath came out in white puffs as he pulled his jacket tighter against the cold. The dashboard clock read 6:45 p.m. He'd spent nearly 2 hours at Wilson's tree farm, carefully selecting the perfect Fraser fir while families around him shared hot cocoa and laughter. Bob Wilson, the elderly owner who'd been selling them trees for the past decade, had shuffled over with concern etched on his weathered face. "First time in 10 years I haven't seen you two picking out a tree together," Bob had said, adjusting his worn red cap. "Emma doing all right?" Mark had forced a smile, the same one he'd been wearing more frequently lately. "Just busy with work," he'd replied, the lie tasting bitter on his tongue. "You know how it gets around the holidays?" Bob's knowing look had suggested he wasn't convinced, but he merely nodded and helped Mark secure the tree to the SUV's roof rack. Now, standing in his driveway, with darkness creeping in, Mark called out to the silent house. "Emma!" His voice echoed across the empty driveway. "The tree's here. Come help me bring it in." The house remained dark except for the porch light he'd left on before heading to the tree lot. Emma's black BMW sat in the driveway, a light dusting of snow already accumulating on its hood. The sight of it triggered a memory from earlier that morning. He'd watched her rush out at 7 a.m., claiming an early meeting at work. But when he'd called her office around lunch to invite her tree shopping, her assistant had mentioned she hadn't come in until 10. The discrepancy gnawed at him, joining a growing list of small inconsistencies he'd been trying to ignore. Their neighbor, Tom Mitchell, emerged from his garage across the street, dragging garbage bins to the curb. "Hey, Mark, finally got your tree." "Huh? Yeah, just picked it up from Wilson's." Mark waved, noticing how Tom's eyes flickered to Emma's car, then back to him. The neighbors had stopped asking why Emma missed their weekly block gatherings months ago. "Need a hand getting it inside." Mark shook his head. "Thanks, but I've got it. Done it enough times now." He immediately regretted the words. Hearing the unintended bitterness in them, Tom hesitated, then nodded. "Well, Carol's making her famous eggnog this weekend if you and Emma want to stop by." "I'll let her know," Mark replied, knowing they wouldn't go. Emma had been avoiding the neighbors since the Labor Day barbecue. When Carol had mentioned seeing her at the Westfield Mall with some friend from work on a day she claimed to be visiting her sister, Mark pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over Emma's contact before he pocketed the device with a sigh. Better to handle the tree himself than risk another tense exchange. The past few months had brought subtle changes in their relationship, changes Mark tried his best to ignore. Emma's increasing emotional distance felt like a slowly widening crack in a foundation he'd thought solid. 10 years of marriage, built on what he believed was unshakable trust, now seemed to tremble at the edges. That he remembered their first Christmas together in this house. They'd spent hours decorating, stealing kisses between hanging ornaments, making love on the living room floor with only the tree lights illuminating their bodies. Back then, Emma would spend weeks planning their holiday decorations, insisting on color schemes and themes that changed each year. Now, he couldn't remember the last time she'd shown interest in anything they used to share. Mark wrestled the 7-foot Fraser fir from the car, grimacing as sticky sap coated his gloves. Pine needles scattered across the fresh snow, leaving dark impressions like tiny wounds on the white surface. The tree was perfect, full, and symmetrical, with sturdy branches to hold their collection of ornaments. He'd specifically chosen one with the characteristics Emma always insisted on. No bare spots, strong branches for their heavier decorations, and that distinct Christmas tree shape she loved. His muscles strained as he maneuvered the tree toward the front door. A car drove by slowly, holiday music drifting from its open windows. The melody of "I'll Be Home for Christmas" felt like a mockery of his current situation. The front door creaked open as he approached, revealing Emma in yoga pants and an oversized sweater one he didn't recognize. She leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. The faint scent of unfamiliar perfume drifted from her, another recent change he'd noticed but hadn't confronted her about. "You got the tree without me." Her voice carried a hint of accusation, but her eyes kept darting to her phone, which she held loosely in one hand. Mark paused, adjusting his grip on the trunk. Melting snow dripped down his neck, but he barely noticed the cold. "I called you earlier about going to pick one out. You said you had a headache. That was hours ago. You could have checked if I was feeling better." She shifted her weight, a gesture he'd come to recognize as impatience. "I did text you," Mark said, trying to keep his tone light despite the familiar frustration building in his chest. "Twice, actually, at 4 and again at 5:30. Emma pulled out her phone, frowning at the screen. A notification lit up her face, and he caught a fleeting smile before she quickly suppressed it. "Oh, I must have missed them." She stepped back inside without offering to help. Her attention already back on her phone, Mark maneuvered the tree through the doorway, leaving a trail of needles across the hardwood floors. The living room was ready for decorating, with boxes of ornaments stacked neatly beside the antique stand Emma's parents had given them for their first Christmas together. He'd spent the previous weekend organizing everything while Emma was supposedly at a girls' brunch that lasted well into the evening. "Watch the floor," Emma called from the kitchen, not looking up from her phone. "Those needles are going to scratch the wood." Mark bit back a sharp response. The hardwood floors had been his project last spring. 3 weekends of backbreaking work while Emma was at a professional development conference she'd been suspiciously vague about. "I thought we could decorate it tonight," he said, positioning the tree in the corner. "Make some hot chocolate, put on some Christmas music. Like we used to." He glanced at her hopefully, remembering how she used to insist on making her grandmother's secret recipe hot chocolate, complete with homemade marshmallows. That Emma's attention remained fixed on her phone, her thumbs moving rapidly across the screen. "Maybe tomorrow. I'm not really in the mood right now." "That's what you said about the holiday party at Dave and Lisa's last weekend." Mark straightened, brushing needles from his jacket. "And about helping me put up the lights outside." The memories of her constant excuses piled up like the falling snow outside. "Are you keeping score now?" Emma's eyes finally met his, sharp with irritation. The warm brown eyes that had once looked at him with love now seemed to belong to a stranger. "Because if we're counting things, I could mention how you've been hovering lately, questioning everything I do. I wouldn't have to question anything if you just talked to me." Mark stepped toward her, but she subtly shifted away, creating distance between them. "When did we stop talking, Emma?" "We're talking right now," she said flatly. "And all I'm hearing is accusations and guilt trips about Christmas decorations, of all things." "It's not about the decorations." Her phone buzzed again, and her fingers twitched toward it instinctively. "I can't do this right now, Mark. I have a headache." "Convenient," he muttered. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just like all your late meetings and weekend brunches mean nothing, right?" Emma's face flushed, but her voice remained steady. "I'm not doing this. Not tonight." She turned toward the stairs, then paused. "And since you're so interested in my schedule, I have an early meeting tomorrow. Don't wait up." The words hung in the air like frost as Emma disappeared upstairs, her footsteps echoing through the house. Mark stood in the living room, the scent of pine mixing with the lingering trace of her unfamiliar perfume. The Christmas tree loomed beside him, a silent witness to their crumbling marriage, that he spent the next hour methodically setting up the tree, each movement precise and controlled. The metal stand needed adjusting several times before the trunk sat perfectly straight. Through the ceiling, he could hear Emma moving around upstairs, her footsteps occasionally pausing near the bathroom or their bedroom. Each time her phone chimed, the footsteps would stop, the first string of lights tangled in his hands as he worked. They bought these last year at the after-Christmas sale, planning ahead as they always did. Emma had insisted on the warm, white LEDs, claiming they gave the tree a more elegant look than the multicolored ones he preferred. Now he wondered if someone else had influenced that decision. "You're doing it wrong." Emma's voice startled him. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, still in her yoga outfit, but now wearing a jacket he didn't recognize. "The lights need to go around the trunk first, then out to the branches." Mark continued his methodical rapping. "That's how you like it. I'm doing it my way this year." "Fine." She grabbed her purse from the entry table. "I'm going out for a bit. Need some air." At 9 o'clock at night, Mark checked his watch pointedly. With a headache, Emma's hand tightened on her purse strap. "Don't start, Mark. I'll be back in an hour. Like your quick coffee last Tuesday that turned into 4 hours. I told you I ran into some colleagues, right?" Mark turned back to the tree. "Say hi to your colleagues for me." The front door slammed in response, hard enough to shake the wreath hanging on it. Through the window, Mark watched Emma's BMW back out of the driveway, its headlights cutting through the falling snow before disappearing down the street. As he wrapped the lights around the tree's branches, memories flooded back unbidden. Their first Christmas tree had been barely 4 feet tall, all they could afford as newlyweds. Emma had made paper chains to decorate it, and they'd topped it with a star from the dollar store. They'd been so happy then, dreaming of all the Christmases ahead of them. The ornament boxes sat unopened, each one labeled in Emma's neat handwriting. Glass balls, sentimental, handmade. He lifted the lid of the sentimental box, revealing tissue-wrapped treasures from their shared history. The blown glass snowflake from their honeymoon in Vermont caught the light, sending rainbow reflections across the wall. Emma had been so excited to find it in that little craft shop, insisting it would be the first of many vacation ornaments. His fingers brushed against the ceramic star she'd painted at one of those pottery places she used to drag him to. The blue and gold design was amateur but heartfelt, with their initials intertwined on the back. She'd been so proud of it, even though the paint was uneven and the points weren't quite symmetrical. At the bottom of the box lay the silver bell engraved with their wedding date. Mark lifted it carefully, the metal cool against his palm. The engraving had worn slightly over the years. Mark and Emma Andrews, December 15th, 10 years and 9 days ago. He'd planned to surprise her with a special anniversary dinner last week, but she called at the last minute, claiming a work emergency kept her at the office. That Mark's phone buzzed a text from Tom across the street. "Hey," saw Emma heading out. "Everything okay?" He stared at the message, wondering how many other neighbors had noticed their disintegrating marriage. How many pitying looks and whispered conversations had he missed? Mark left the message unanswered and went to clean up the scattered pine needles. The cleaning supplies weren't in their usual spot under the kitchen sink. Half the cabinet had been reorganized recently, another of Emma's sudden changes. She'd been on a cleaning spree lately, purging closets and rearranging storage spaces. Now he wondered what she'd been trying to hide. Mark headed to the garage, where Emma had moved several household items during her reorganization phase. The temperature dropped noticeably as he stepped into the unheated space. Motion sensor lights flickered on, illuminating shelves of holiday decorations and storage bins. He searched for the vacuum. His eye caught something out of place, a small wooden box partially hidden behind some Halloween decorations. The sight of it stopped him cold. He recognized it immediately. Emma's old keepsake box from college, the one she claimed was lost during their last move. The box shouldn't have been there. Emma had cried over losing it, spent weeks checking moving boxes and calling the moving company about it. She'd been so distraught that Mark had offered to buy her a replacement, but she'd insisted nothing could replace the memories it contained. Curiosity overrode his initial instinct to leave it alone. The lid opened with a soft creak, revealing a jumble of papers, photos, and small trinkets. Some items he recognized: concert tickets from bands they'd seen together, dried flowers from their wedding. Others seemed newer, out of place among the memories they'd supposedly shared. Mark's throat tightened as he spotted unfamiliar handwriting on several notes near the top. Love letters, he realized with growing horror. Recent ones, dated within the last 6 months. His hands trembled as he set them aside, not ready to read their contents. Beneath them lay a folded piece of paper in Emma's distinctive handwriting. Her familiar loops and swirls formed words that made his blood run cold. "Dear Santa, I want to get fucked by 5 black guys. My lover and my husband aren't enough for me." The garage seemed to tilt sideways. Mark's vision tunneled, the words burning into his retinas as he read them again and again. Each repetition hammered another nail into the coffin of his marriage. His hands shook violently as he set the letter down, ball rising in his throat. A sudden noise made him jump. Emma's car pulling back into the driveway. The motion sensor light clicked on automatically, flooding the garage with harsh fluorescent brightness. Mark quickly gathered the letter and several other items that caught his eye. including what appeared to be a burner phone wrapped in tissue paper at the bottom of the box. He slipped everything into his jacket pocket just as Emma entered through the side door, shaking snow from her hair. Her cheeks were flushed, and that unfamiliar perfume was stronger now. "What are you doing out here?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. Mark held up the vacuum he'd originally come to find. "Pine needles," he said simply, proud of how steady his voice remained despite the evidence of her betrayal burning a hole in his pocket. "Oh." Emma shifted her purse higher on her shoulder. "I thought I moved that to the basement." "Guess not." He wheeled the vacuum past her, careful not to brush against her as he passed. "How was your meeting?" The question caught her off guard. I just needed some fresh air. Drove around for a bit." "In this weather?" Mark gestured to the increasing snowfall outside. "Must have been important." Emma's eyes narrowed slightly. "I said I needed air. Are you interrogating me now?" "Just making conversation." He forced a smile. "Isn't that what married people do?" Something flickered across Emma's face. Guilt? Fear? But it vanished quickly behind her practiced mask of indifference. "I'm going to take a shower," she announced, already heading for the door. "Sure. I'll just clean up these pine needles. Wouldn't want them scratching your precious hardwood floors." Once she was gone, Mark retrieved the letter and phone from his pocket. His lawyer's mind was already cataloging next steps, building a case. He needed more evidence. The letter alone wasn't enough, and he wanted everything documented before he made his move. In his home office, Mark connected the burner phone to power. While it charged, he began creating an encrypted folder on his laptop. Years of handling divorce cases had taught him the importance of thorough documentation. He photographed the letter and love notes. Careful to preserve the dates and details, the shower started running upstairs. Emma's regular phone sat unattended on the kitchen counter, plugged in to charge. Mark knew her passcode, 12:15, their wedding date. The irony wasn't lost on him as his fingers tapped out the numbers that had once meant so much to them. The phone unlocked, revealing a screen full of notifications. Several were from someone saved simply as J. Mark's fingers moved swiftly, taking screenshots of suspicious text conversations. The messages to Jay were explicit, detailing meetups and sexual encounters. Each image felt like another knife in his back, but he forced himself to document everything that he discovered a hidden email account linked to her phone. More evidence poured out: hotel reservations, intimate conversations, plans for future encounters. Emma had created an entire secret life parallel to their marriage. The depth of her deception was staggering. The burner phone had finished charging. Its screen flickered to life, revealing dozens more messages that confirmed his worst fears. Emma had been methodical in her betrayal, using different devices for different aspects of her infidelity. The burner phone seemed dedicated to arranging group encounters, fulfilling the darker fantasies she'd written about in her letter. Mark worked through the night, building his case with cold precision. The betrayal felt like a physical weight in his chest, crushing his lungs and squeezing his heart. But he refused to break down. Instead, he channeled everything into his plan. Each piece of evidence became another weapon in his arsenal. Carefully cataloged and prepared for maximum impact, the grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight as Mark created encrypted folders for the evidence. The sound echoed through the quiet house, marking the beginning of his countdown to revenge. Christmas was 5 days away. 5 days to prepare the perfect gift for his unfaithful wife. Emma appeared in the office doorway, wearing the silk robe he'd given her last Christmas. Steam from her shower still clung to her skin, and her hair hung in damp waves. The sight of her once would have stirred desire. Now it only fed his rage. "Coming to bed?" she asked, her voice carrying that familiar note of forced casualness she'd adopted lately. Mark looked up from his laptop, his face carefully neutral. Years of courtroom experience helped him maintain his composure. "Soon. Just finishing up some work. Don't stay up too late." She smiled, the same smile he'd fallen in love with, now twisted by knowledge of her deceit. "I was thinking maybe we could decorate the tree tomorrow after all." "Sounds perfect," Mark replied, his voice steady despite the acid churning in his stomach. "I'm looking forward to it." The double meaning of his words gave him a grim satisfaction that Emma's footsteps faded down the hall. Mark opened his email, beginning a series of messages that would set his revenge in motion. No confrontation yet. No explosion of anger. That would come later, wrapped in shiny paper and tied with a ballpoint one by one. He began preparing emails to everyone who needed to know about Emma's betrayal. Her family, their friends, her workplace. Each message was carefully crafted, with selected evidence attached. All were scheduled to deliver on Christmas morning. Immediately after he gave Emma her special gift, the computer's clock ticked past midnight as Mark worked, each minute bringing them closer to a Christmas morning that would shatter their carefully constructed facade. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering their suburban street in a blanket of deceptive peace. But inside Mark's office, plans for destruction took shape with cold, meticulous precision that he thought about the Christmas tree standing half-decorated in the living room, its lights casting shadows on the walls. Soon enough, those shadows would seem fitting dark reflections of the truth he'd discovered. Mark smiled grimly as he continued his work. This would be a Christmas Emma would never forget. The next 4 days passed like a slow-motion nightmare. Mark maintained his facade of normalcy while methodically preparing for Christmas Eve, watching Emma's every move with newfound clarity. The signs he'd been ignoring for months now screamed at him. Her lingering perfume when she returned late, the mysterious calls she took in the garage, the way she guarded her phones like they contained state secrets each morning. He watched her leave for her early meetings, noting how she'd check her reflection in the hallway mirror, adjusting clothes that seemed to grow more provocative by the day. Her designer heels clicked against the hardwood floors as she strutted around their home, reminding him of the credit card statements he'd discovered. Thousands spent at boutiques he'd never heard of, all charged to accounts he hadn't known existed. "Don't forget we have dinner with my parents tomorrow night," Emma reminded him on December 23rd, not looking up from her phone as she gathered her keys. The diamond tennis bracelet he'd given her last Christmas glinted on her wrist, another gift she'd made a mockery of. "Actually, I made other plans," Mark replied, sipping his coffee while reviewing the final draft of his revenge email on his laptop. Business dinner with a new client. Emma's head snapped up, her perfectly manicured nails tightening around her phone case. "You can't cancel on my parents. It's tradition, like our tradition of picking out the Christmas tree together." Mark kept his voice level, watching her reaction. "Or decorating it as a couple? Funny how some traditions matter more than others." "That's different, is it?" He set down his mug with deliberate care, enjoying how she shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "Besides, your parents will see plenty of you on Christmas Day. When the truth comes out." "What's that supposed to mean?" Her voice carried a note of panic that satisfied something dark within him. Mark smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Nothing. Just thinking out loud. Have a good day at work, Emma. Don't stay too late." The double meaning made her flush. She left in a hurry, the door slamming behind her. Through the window, Mark watched her check her makeup one more time in her car mirror before pulling out of the driveway. The moment her BMW disappeared around the corner, he retrieved the special gift box he'd prepared from his office safe. Inside lay divorce papers, meticulously arranged alongside DVDs containing evidence of her infidelity and that damning letter to Santa. He'd spent hours getting everything perfect, wrapping it in expensive silver paper with a blood-red bow. The color seemed fitting. This gift would be the death of their marriage. The day before Christmas Eve, Mark noticed Emma making furtive phone calls from the garden. Even through the double-paned windows, he could hear the urgency in her voice. Later, he checked the call logs he'd been monitoring. She'd been warning her lovers, trying to coordinate their stories. Too late. He already had everything he needed. Christmas Eve arrived crisp and clear, the morning sun glinting off fresh snow like thousands of accusing eyes. Emma seemed on edge all day, alternating between forced cheerfulness and suspicious glances in Mark's direction. She'd even attempted to decorate the tree with him that morning. Though her phone kept buzzing with messages, she tried to check discreetly. "Remember our first Christmas here?" she asked, hanging a glass ornament that caught the light like a tear. "We were so broke we could barely afford decorations." "I remember," Mark replied, thinking of the evidence hidden in his office. "You made paper chains because we couldn't afford tinsel. Funny how things change." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just reminiscing." He handed her another ornament, one they'd bought on their honeymoon. "Speaking of memories, I found something interesting in the garage the other day." Emma's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the ornament. Oh, yeah, that old keepsake box you claimed was lost in the move. Mark watched her face carefully. Funny how it turned up, isn't it? The ornament slipped from Emma's fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. She stared at the broken pieces, her face draining of color. Time seemed to freeze as the tiny shards caught the Christmas tree lights, reflecting her guilt back at her like dozens of accusing eyes. I meant to tell you I found it, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Did you? Mark stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. And when were you planning to tell me about everything else I found in it? Emma backed away from the broken ornament, her eyes darting between Mark and the door. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, probably another message from one of her lovers. I don't know what you think you found. Don't. Mark's voice cut through her excuse like a blade. Don't you dare lie to me again. Not tonight. Mark, whatever you think is going on, sit down. He gestured to the couch, the same couch where he'd found her with one of her lovers in the security footage. When she hesitated, he added, unless you'd prefer I start making phone calls right now. Your parents might be interested in how you've really been spending your late meetings. Emma sank onto the couch, her hands clutching her phone like a lifeline. Mark noticed she was wearing the diamond earrings he'd given her last Christmas, another calculated move on her part, no doubt. Everything about her suddenly looked false, from her perfectly styled hair to her carefully chosen outfit. She'd dressed for this evening like it was a performance, but he was about to bring down the curtain. It's present time, Mark announced, retrieving the silver-wrapped box from his office. The weight of it felt right in his hands, heavy with consequences. He set it on the coffee table between them with deliberate care. Mark, please. Open it. His voice was steel wrapped in silk. After all, isn't this what Christmas is about? Sharing our deepest wishes. Emma's hands shook as she reached for the box. The silver paper crinkled beneath her fingers as she slowly unwrapped it, each movement hesitant, as if she already knew what lay inside. Pieces of tape stuck to her manicured nails, the same nails that had left marks on their headboard when she'd entertained her visitors. Careful now, Mark said, standing over her. Wouldn't want to damage anything important. Though that ship has probably sailed, hasn't it? The red bow fell to the floor as Emma lifted the lid. Her face went from pale to ash gray as she saw the contents. The divorce papers lay on top, her numerous infidelities listed in cold, legal language. Beneath them, the DVDs gleamed like accusations. And there, placed deliberately on top, was her letter to Santa. Oh God, she whispered, the paper trembling in her hands. Mark, I can explain. Explain what exactly? He picked up the letter, holding it like it was contaminated. How about we start with this charming little Christmas wish list? Dear Santa, I want to get fucked by 5 black guys. Very festive. Tell me, was that before or after you started meeting strangers at hotels? I was drunk when I wrote that. It didn't mean anything. But you meant enough to keep it, didn't you? Hidden away with all your other dirty little secrets. Mark began laying out printed screenshots from her phones. Like these messages to Jay, very graphic stuff, Emma. I especially enjoyed the parts where you mocked our marriage. What was it you called me? Your boring, predictable husband? He pulled out more evidence, spreading it across the coffee table like a twisted Christmas display. Here's a good one from last month. You told Chris, the personal trainer, right? That you laughed every time you kissed me goodnight after being with him. Said it gave you a special thrill. Did you get the same thrill when you used our bed for your little parties? Tears streaked Emma's expensive makeup as she stared at the evidence of her betrayal. The carefully crafted facade she'd maintained for months crumbled before his eyes. Please, we can work through this. I'll do anything, like you did anything with those men at the Holiday Inn last week. Mark's voice was arctic. The front desk was very helpful when I showed them my bar association ID. They remembered you quite well, especially that little scene in the elevator that their security cameras caught. It was a mistake. Emma stood, reaching for him with trembling hands. I love you, Mark. We can fix this. The time for fixing things ended when you decided our marriage wasn't enough for you. He knocked her hands away. When you decided to turn our life into a lie. Tell me, did you think about our vows while you were living out your fantasies? Or were you too busy planning your next adventure? What do you want from me? Her voice cracked with desperation. Want? Mark laughed, the sound devoid of humor. I want you to get out of my house. Now. What? But it's Christmas Eve. Perfect timing, isn't it? Consider it my gift to you, freedom to pursue all those fantasies of yours. He picked up her phone, tossing it to her. Maybe one of your lovers will take you in, though they might be busy when they receive the evidence packages I've prepared. Emma's face drained of what little color remained. She gripped the back of the couch for support. What evidence packages? Copies of everything. The letter, the photos, the hotel receipts. All neatly documented and ready to share with your family, friends, and colleagues. Mark smiled coldly. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Your parents should be especially interested in those videos from the Hampton Inn. You know, the ones where you explained in detail how you were playing me for a fool. You wouldn't dare. Try me? Mark moved to the front door, opening it to the snowy night. Cruel December wind whipped into the house, making the Christmas tree lights flicker. You have 5 minutes to get out. Whatever you're wearing right now is what you leave with. The rest of your things will be handled through our lawyers. Mark, please, Emma begged, tears freezing on her cheeks in the winter air. She hugged herself against the cold, her thin sweater offering no protection. It's freezing out there. At least let me pack a bag. 4 minutes now. Tick-tock. You can't do this. Her voice rose hysterically. This is my home, too. Was your home? Mark's voice remained steady, until you decided to turn it into your personal brothel. I have security footage of you bringing men here while I was at conferences. Our bedroom, Emma? Really? The bed we bought together? Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Those videos were private. Private? Mark's laugh was cold enough to match the winter air. Like the videos you let them take of you? The ones you never knew about because you were too busy living out your fantasies to notice the hidden cameras? Your lovers were quite entrepreneurial, weren't they? Emma's knees buckled, and she grabbed the doorframe for support. You have videos? I have everything. Mark checked his watch. 3 minutes. Better decide what matters more, your dignity or staying warm tonight. My parents will know everything by morning. The emails are already scheduled. Videos, photos, text messages, everything. He pulled out his phone, showing her the queued emails. I especially like the ones where you describe our marriage counseling sessions as a joke. Your mother will be thrilled to know how you really felt about her suggestions to work things out. Emma's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at it desperately. Just let me make a call. To who? Your lover? Or should I say lovers? Mark pulled out his own phone. Let's see. There's James from your office. Does his wife know he's been spending his lunch breaks with you? Then there's Chris from the gym, though he might be busy with his fiancée tonight. And let's not forget that charming group you met at the Holiday Inn. The ones who filmed everything without your knowledge. Stop it. Emma pressed her hands against her ears, smearing her mascara. Why? You didn't stop. Not when you were writing that letter. Not when you were sneaking around behind my back. Not when you were laughing about our marriage with your lovers. Mark's voice grew colder with each word. 2 minutes. Tick-tock, Emma. The clock's running out, just like your options. I'll tell everyone you abused me. Go ahead. Mark held up his phone. I've recorded every conversation we've had for the past week, including this one. Try to smear me, and I'll bury you so deep in evidence you'll never crawl out. One word from you, and every video, every photo, every message goes public. How's your career in real estate going to survive that? What about my clothes? My jewelry? You can have what the divorce settlement allows. After your lovers' wives finish their lawsuits. He smiled grimly. I made sure to document the value of those gifts you received. Tax fraud is such an ugly thing. The IRS is very interested in unreported income from your extracurricular activities. Emma's shoulders slumped in defeat. Outside, the snow was falling harder, the wind whipping it into small cyclones on the front lawn. Their neighbors' Christmas lights cast colorful shadows across the untouched snow, a mockery of holiday cheer. 1 minute, Mark announced. Though I should mention, the security cameras are already recording. How do you think your parents will feel watching you get thrown out on Christmas Eve? Imagine their faces when they learn why. Emma stumbled toward the door, her thin sweater offering little protection against the December night. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "No, Emma. The only thing I regret is wasting 10 years with someone who could throw away our marriage for a cheap thrill." Mark's voice was final. 30 seconds. Better start walking. It's 3 miles to the nearest hotel, though they might not be too welcoming once they receive my evidence package. She stepped out into the snow, her designer shoes sinking into the fresh powder. The wind immediately whipped her hair across her face, catching her tears and freezing them before they could fall. "Oh, and Emma," Mark called after her, "don't bother going to the Holiday Inn. I've already sent them evidence of your little parties there. Same with the Marriott and that charming little motel off Route 7. Amazing how helpful hotels can be when presented with proof of illegal activities on their premises." Emma turned back one last time, her face a mask of mascara-streaked devastation. "I did love you once." "Funny." Mark gripped the door handle. "I don't remember love being on your Christmas wish list. But then again, you had other priorities, didn't you?" The door closed with a final click, the lock engaging with mechanical precision. Through the frosted glass, Mark watched Emma's figure grow smaller as she stumbled down the snowy driveway, her phone clutched uselessly in her hand. He knew her calls would go unanswered. He'd already contacted each of her lovers, warning them of the consequences of offering her help inside. The grandfather clock struck 9, its chimes echoing through the silent house. Mark walked to his office, where his laptop showed dozens of emails queued for morning delivery. Each one contained carefully selected evidence, explicit messages for her parents, financial records for her workplace, hotel receipts for her friends, video clips for her lovers' wives. His phone buzzed with incoming messages as the news began to spread. Emma's secret life was already unraveling. Her lover James's wife had seen her running past their house and called to ask what was happening. Mark's response had been simple: "Check your email in the morning. Merry Christmas." The Christmas tree lights reflected off the divorce papers still lying on the coffee table. Mark gathered them carefully, along with the scattered evidence of Emma's betrayal. Each item went into a dedicated folder. One copy for their lawyers, one for the court, and others for everyone who needed to know the truth about Emma Andrews tomorrow. While families across town opened presents and celebrated together, Emma's carefully constructed world would implode. Her reputation, her job, her social standing, everything she valued would crumble like the shattered ornament still lying on the floor. Mark poured himself a glass of the expensive scotch Emma had given him for his birthday. Another gift she'd probably charged to her secret credit card, the one he'd discovered hidden in her desk. He sipped it slowly, savoring both the burn of the alcohol and the knowledge that his revenge was only beginning. The phone calls would start early. Emma's mother always checked her email first thing on Christmas morning. Her father would see the evidence while drinking his morning coffee. By noon, their entire social circle would know. By evening, Emma's carefully curated image would be destroyed outside. The snow continued to fall, erasing Emma's footprints from the driveway like nature itself was helping to erase her from his life. Mark smiled as he watched, knowing that tomorrow would bring a different kind of Christmas celebration, one where truth replaced presents and justice served as its own reward. Christmas morning dawned bitter and gray, the temperature having plunged well below freezing overnight. Mark sat in his home office, watching his laptop clock tick towards 7 a.m., the moment his automated emails would begin their destructive journey. The room still held traces of Emma's perfume from when she'd tried to seduce him last week. Another manipulation he now recognized for what it was. His phone buzzed for the 20th time since midnight. Another desperate message from Emma. She'd spent the night calling and texting from different numbers after he'd blocked her main one. Each message grew more frantic than the last. "Give me a chance to explain," the latest one read. "Please, Mark, don't do this. I'll tell you everything." "Too late," he muttered, deleting it without responding, just as he had the others. The security cameras showed the street remained empty, no sign of her trying to return home. His neighbor Tom had texted earlier about seeing her trying to sleep in her car 3 blocks away, until a police patrol had moved her along. The laptop clock hit 7 a.m. Mark watched with cold satisfaction as the status indicators on his scheduled emails changed from scheduled to sent one by one. Each ping represented another nail in the coffin of Emma's carefully constructed life. At 7:05 a.m., his phone rang. Emma's mother's name flashed on the screen. Mark. Linda's voice trembled. What is this? These pictures, these videos. Tell me this isn't real. Merry Christmas, Linda. Mark's voice remained steady, professional, the same tone he used in court when delivering devastating evidence. I wish I could tell you it wasn't real, but every bit of it is true. But she's our daughter, and she was my wife. He cut her off sharply. Ask her about the letter to Santa. Ask her about the Holiday Inn. Ask her about the secret credit cards and the afternoon meetings that never happened. Ask her how many men she brought into our home while I was working to provide for her. A choked sob came through the speaker. He's reading everything now. These men, these things she did. How could she? That's a question you'll have to ask Emma. Mark glanced at his security feeds. Still no sign of his soon-to-be ex-wife trying to return, though you might have trouble reaching her. The hotels aren't being very accommodating after what I sent them. Where is she? Linda's voice cracked. She's not answering her phone, probably trying to find someone who'll still take her calls. Her lovers seem to be busy with their own domestic situations this morning. The line went silent for a moment. Then, those videos, the things she said about us, about you, about how she laughed at your attempts to save our marriage? Mark's voice hardened. About how she mocked our counseling sessions. Or about how she used your family gatherings as covers for her meetups. Oh God. Linda's breathing grew ragged. Robert wants to talk to you. The next call came directly from Emma's father. Robert's normally booming voice was raw with fury. Where is she? I don't know, Mark replied truthfully. I put her out last night. She had a lot of friends she could call, though they might be busy dealing with their own domestic situations this morning. Good. Robert's response carried the weight of decades of disappointment. She doesn't deserve shelter after this. We raised her better. The things she wrote, the videos, that letter, the Santa letter was particularly creative, Mark said dryly, though the hotel security footage was more illuminating. We've already called our lawyer. She's out of the will. Robert's voice shook with suppressed rage. No daughter of mine would do these things. The woman in those videos, that's not who we raised. Mark's attention shifted to one of his security monitors. A black Mercedes had just pulled into his neighbor's driveway. He recognized it as belonging to James, one of Emma's more frequent lovers. I'll have to call you back, Robert. It seems one of Emma's friends has decided to pay a visit. He watched through the cameras as James approached his front door, looking considerably less polished than usual. His expensive suit was rumpled, and a dark bruise colored his left cheek. Mark pressed the intercom. Bit early for a Christmas visit, isn't it, James? We need to talk. James glanced nervously over his shoulder. My wife, she's seen everything. My kids. Sounds like a personal problem. Mark's voice was ice. How's the face? Your wife is quite a right hook from what I hear. Look, you've made your point. But these videos, if they get out, they're already out. Mark smiled coldly. Check your office email. I'm sure your partners at the firm will be fascinated by your creative use of the conference room after hours. James's face went pale. You can't. I already did. Merry Christmas, James. Give my best to your wife. Oh wait, she's filing for divorce, isn't she? As James stumbled back to his car, Mark's phone buzzed with a message from Emma's real estate office. The managing partner, Richard, had apparently started his day early, just reviewed the evidence, taking immediate action. Emma's access cards have been deactivated, and security has been notified not to allow her entry. We'll need a formal statement from you for the ethics board. Mark typed back, check the footage from the office Christmas party. Pay special attention to the supply closet around 9 p.m. You'll have all the evidence you need. By 8 a.m., his phone was buzzing constantly. Friends, neighbors, colleagues, all reading the evidence, all reaching out with mixed shock and sympathy. He let most calls go to voicemail, satisfied that his plan was working exactly as intended. Carol from across the street called in tears. We just saw Emma trying to sleep in her car down on Maple. Tom called the police. We can't have that sort of thing in our neighborhood. Did you know she tried to seduce him at the Labor Day barbecue? Add it to the list, Mark replied. How's Tom taking it? Furious. He's already shared those videos you sent with the neighborhood watch group. No one could believe what she did. And in our community, his email inbox filled with responses. Each one confirmed another piece of Emma's life crumbling away. Her gym membership revoked after the manager reviewed security footage of her activities in the private training rooms. Her yoga studio canceling her classes after discovering what she'd been doing in the meditation space after hours. Every carefully cultivated relationship and connection turning toxic with revealed truth. Around 9 a.m., a pounding at his front door drew his attention to the security cameras. Emma stood there, mascara streaked down her face, still wearing the same clothes from last night. She looked like she'd spent hours in the cold, her expensive sweater now stained and torn. "Mark!" Her voice was hoarse from crying. "Let me in. Everyone's turning against me. My phone's dead, and nobody will help me." He pressed the intercom button. "Sounds like a personal problem. My parents won't answer my calls. James blocked my number, and Chris's fiancé threatened to sue me." She pounded on the door again. "The police made me leave my car. I have nowhere to go. Should have thought about that before you decided to live out your fantasies." Mark's voice dripped contempt. "How many men was it total, Emma? The evidence suggests at least 12 different ones. Or did you lose count? You're destroying my life." "No, you did that yourself. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth." He watched her through the camera. "I'd leave if I were you. The neighbors are already recording this little scene. Wouldn't want to add public disturbance to your list of accomplishments." Tom emerged from his house across the street, phone raised to capture Emma's breakdown. Behind him, Carol was already on her phone, likely calling other neighbors to witness the spectacle. Emma slumped against the door, her designer shoes ruined by the snow. "I'll tell everyone you abused me, that you forced me into. Go ahead." Mark's laugh was cold. "The recordings of your little confessions at the Holiday Inn might contradict that story. You know, the ones where you bragged about how easy it was to fool your boring, trusting husband while you lived out your fantasies. Those were private moments. Like the private moments you shared with half the country club. Don't worry, they've already revoked your membership. Something about moral turpitude and bringing disrepute to the establishment." She slid down to sit on the frozen steps, her thin sweater offering no protection against the bitter cold. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. You're nothing to me now, Emma. Just a cautionary tale about trust and consequences." He watched her shiver. "Better start walking. It's getting colder, and the homeless shelter downtown fills up early on Christmas." "Mark, please. I'm freezing. Should have thought about that before you threw away 10 years of marriage for a cheap thrill. Or should I say multiple cheap thrills?" A police car turned onto their street, responding to what Mark assumed were neighbor complaints. Emma struggled to her feet, her legs unsteady. "You'll regret this. Someday you'll realize. The only thing I realize is that I wasted too many years with a woman who confused loyalty with weakness." Mark's voice was final. "Goodbye, Emma. Don't come back." He watched through the cameras as she stumbled away from the approaching police car, her phone clutched uselessly in her hand. Officer Peterson, who had been one of their regular dinner guests, stepped out of the cruiser. "Emma." Peterson's voice carried clearly through the security system. "We've had multiple complaints. You need to leave the area." "Bill, please," Emma begged. "You know me?" "I thought I did." Peterson's face was stone. "Now I know better. Move along, or I'll have to take you in for trespassing." The day continued its devastating march. By noon, Emma's real estate office had removed her profile from their website. Her social media accounts disappeared one by one as friends and colleagues distanced themselves. The local country club, where she'd met several of her lovers, sent Mark a formal letter expressing their regret and assuring him that her membership had been revoked. Her sister Jennifer called around too, her voice tight with controlled anger. "She tried to come here. Can you believe it? Showed up crying about how everyone had abandoned her. What did you do?" "Told her to leave before I called the police. My children don't need to be exposed to someone like that." Jennifer's disgust was palpable. "The nerve of her showing up on Christmas Day after what she did to you. After what she wrote about our family in those messages. How are your parents holding up?" "Dad's already had the locks changed at their house. Mom's in bed with a migraine." Jennifer paused. "They're selling the vacation house in Vermont. They can't stand the thought of her having any claim to family property." Mark's phone buzzed with another update, this time from Chris's fiancée, Ashley. "Thought you want to know. She tried to get into our gym, claiming she'd left some things in her locker. Security threw her out. The videos of her and Chris are all over the trainer group chat now. Evening found Mark sitting by his fireplace, sipping the expensive scotch Emma had given him. The Christmas tree lights cast shadows on the walls, but they no longer felt oppressive. Instead, they seemed to dance in celebration of truth revealed and justice served. His phone buzzed with texts from various sources, each bringing news of Emma's continuing downfall. The Holiday Inn manager reported she'd tried to book a room using an old gift card, only to be escorted out by security. Her favorite boutique had canceled her store credit account and banned her from the premises. Even her regular coffee shop had put up her picture behind the counter with a "Do Not Serve" note that a text from Emma's father arrived just before midnight. "We've removed her from the will. The lawyers will ensure she never sees a penny of family money. Some choices can't be undone." Mark smiled, satisfaction warming him more than the scotch. He'd not only exposed Emma's betrayal, but had systematically dismantled every aspect of her life. No shelter, no money, no friends, no family. She would learn the true cost of her choices. The final text from Emma came as Christmas Day faded to night. "You've taken everything from me." "No," he typed back, his first direct response to her. "You gave it all away. Merry Christmas." Outside, the temperature dropped to single digits as the last hours of Christmas ticked away. Somewhere in the cold darkness, Emma faced the consequences of her actions, homeless and abandoned. Mark raised his glass in a silent toast, knowing that his revenge was complete. She would never recover from this, and that was exactly what he'd intended. The grandfather clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the quiet house. Mark stood at his window, watching the stars emerge in the clearing sky. He felt no remorse, no second thoughts. Emma had made her choices, and now she would live with the consequences. Forever.